Well, hey everybody. I am back having a conversation with Jim Wilder, and I'm going to call this our part two, Jim, because we have had a really great conversation that I'm still getting feedback on all the time. So if you guys are listening today and you haven't heard our first conversation, I will put the details below where you can find that. You can visit my website and it's on YouTube as well. But I really want to dive in today to why we are coming together a second time. And we're
Hmm.
going to discuss largely this book, The Solution of Choice. And I want to explain to our friends listening along why we're doing that today. But first, Jim, I just want to see how you're doing. Thanks for being here with me today.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you. And, that book is the only book I ever wrote where the publishers actually accepted the title I suggested. So, I'm sort of delighted of that you like the book. So, because there's my title. I actually wrote that one. Usually the publishers, they get to decide what your title is. But, you get the content. But this time, Solution of Choice just sort of uh, I don't know. It just tickles me every time I see it. So
Oh,
it'd be fun to talk about.
oh, I can't wait. That makes it even better. See, this is why I like to have conversations with the author. You always get to learn little things that you didn't wouldn't otherwise know.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the last time we met up, I kept you on a little bit afterwards, and I wanted to pick your brain on this. I shared a lot of my journey out of this idea of navigating my faith and always trying to find the right thing and always
Mhm.
trying to base my relationship with God off of what I knew about God and my doctrine and beliefs, and just kind of my journey and realizing that wasn't really producing the fruit in my life that I was looking for. And I was talking about how since completing that work, I was really looking for maybe investigating more conversations around faith and neurology and what that looks like, and faith in our beliefs and trusting God. And finally you just went, have you read The Solution of Choice? And I said, what? And I could not wrap my head around a book that you've written, first of all, that I don't know about and haven't read. So I said, no, what's it about? And you told me, and I'm like, that sounds exactly like what I'm looking for kind of this thought bubble that was forming at the time after you'd
Mhm.
read my journey or heard more about my journey.
Yeah.
So in saying that, we got off our call. I ordered that book immediately. And as soon as I got it, I started diving in. And let me just say, I lost a lot of ink underlining every sentence in all of these chapters, Jim. And it's kind of funny because so much of my writing was really kind of pioneering my own logic and understanding around big concepts like what is truth? What is it to
Mhm.
base our relationship with God on beliefs? And why is that? Why does it feel like there should be a different model in place, but not having any real place to have this conversation that made this make sense? And now I discover,
Yeah.
after all the wrestling and struggle in my own journey, now I see it all perfectly summarized in this one book.
At least
And
it's a nice skinny book too.
it's
But
a really
uh,
big book.
yeah, sometimes you intuitively know something, but you just can't put a structure on what
Yeah.
it is and where it came from. And actually, my brother was the one that sort of handed that first thought to me. He got his degree in philosophy and history, and so he was like, have you thought about these things? And I had that moment like you did of like,
Yeah.
oh, well, that explains an awful lot. No wonder things aren't working. So yeah, I love to talk about that with you.
Well, that's what I really enjoyed just in the intro. I wanted, and Timothy is your brother's name, correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So what were some of those big thoughts? Because you honor him in that and saying that's a lot of his those thoughts were where this was birthed from. And I know you partnered with Marcus Warner in this, but so what was
Mhm.
it that really was a catalyst to putting this all together for you?
Well, it started with the conference in 2010 with Dallas Willard, where we were talking about uh, the heart and the soul. And his model, coming from the philosophy side, was all around the will. And so I was thinking, you know what? The brain has got like 6 or 7 different wills at the very minimum, and they're when you look at the brain, you just can't find this will that people are looking at, except way down the process, because about all your will can do is change where you're focusing your attention.
Mhm.
And every place I go in church, it's like you get to the end of the sermon and then they say, "Okay, now here are your choices. You have to improve this week. We explained the
Mhm.
truth to you." And somehow that never worked for me. And it doesn't work with how the brain worked. And so, of course, there was that whole thing with B.F. Skinner and Beyond the Will, and the neurology people. I was saying, well, human beings don't have a will. And so, well, that
Mhm.
can't really be it either. So
Right.
when Tim started explaining to me, I remember sitting there in my living room and just running through other philosophy. And this is how theology got that idea, and how theology got this idea. And I mean, um, I knew enough about theology to know that uh, some things didn't seem to be there in the early church and in Hebrew thought, things like that. But
Mhm.
how it all came together, that it's that sense of history that when you put it together with philosophy,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, that connects all those dots. And I remember sort of lying in bed after we had that conversation, just thinking many thoughts to myself, like, oh, click,
Mhm.
click, click, click. Oh, click, click. Yeah. Uh-huh. So, and then I'd already read a book by Damasio called Descartes' Error, on
Mhm.
how the brain doesn't work the way Descartes does. And we haven't mentioned him yet, but he's one of those philosophers that got into the history about the same time as the Reformation. And so um, these things tried to explain how things work.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things that it's a little bit like the earth and the sun, who rotates around who. Your change of perspective uh, reinterprets how you look at a lot of things. And this is one of those pivotal moments where I went, oh, now I get it. Now I know why theology is always trying to make the sun go around the earth, because they got this idea from Descartes. And
Mhm.
but we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But these are all these things that are just fomenting in there.
Yeah. That made you have to sit down and write it
Yeah.
out. So how did Marcus come into this equation with you?
Well, he was a die-in-the-wool voluntarist,
Yeah.
which are people that believe in this sort of thing. And um, Tim and I were talking about William Ames, and he was one of the Puritans and started the Pilgrim movement that came to the United States and founded our theology schools. And so I'm trying to write about the brain, and Marcus is always trying to turn it into how it works for voluntarists. And I finally just said to Marcus, it's never going to work writing together with you if you keep trying to take, we get this far and then you revert back to where we started from. And you're just too much of a voluntarist. He said, I've never heard of a voluntarist. I mean, he's got his uh, PhD, he's a seminary professor. It's not like
Mhm.
you know, you'd expect him to know a lot of things. So when we hit that spot, it was like, well, you better explain it to me. And I said, well, okay. But if I explain it to you, maybe we should write a book about it together. And
Wow.
and so that's how the idea came out. And so um, he always takes an idea and tries to figure out the simplest way to teach it. So I thought this would be really a good combination. I'll take the stuff I got from my brother that might be over some people's heads. It was over my head. So
Mhm.
yeah, and he'll take, here's a good way to teach it. We'll put it together in a little book. And yeah, it was actually rather fun. And after that, we haven't had any trouble writing together again.
Well, it's true. That is a word. I don't know if I've heard it before I read it in this book either, but I think we should maybe just kick off with that too and just talk about that first part. Let me see if that's first or second. No, that's the second with the choice. So well, let's just
All
back
right.
up for our listeners and kind of thread people into this bigger idea of what what we're talking about with this movement, where we saw all these connecting dots for Jim and the way that he's put this together. Because as I was reading, I think one of my first big aha moments in my own understanding of truth and beliefs, and why I was struggling in my faith because I couldn't manage to find the right thing all the time, was really your teaching on the picker and the
Yes.
sarks. And
Mhm.
I unpacked that with Chris Coursey, and you led me
Mhm.
to more understanding around that. And that's when all these things started lining up for me, but even more so in this book. Like you said, I think when I can look at it with history, now I'm just going, this makes so much sense. So I hope for our
Mhm.
listeners that this will just be a compelling place to sit in and explore today. So let's just
Mhm.
start with that enlightenment movement. I'm just going to read a couple parts of your book here. On page 10 and 11, we're looking at this culture that's moving from the dark ages to the age of enlightenment, in which science and philosophy would guide us to truth rather than the church. So, in
Mhm.
response to this enlightenment philosophy, truth becomes the central issue in the Christian faith. And what I liked it as like a church leader, or what's going on with our seminaries at the time, I'll just pull one more quote here. It's eventually the ability to intelligently articulate what one believed to be true and why one believed it became the most important quality of a Christian leader. We sent pastors to seminaries and colleges to train them in the right belief and the best defenses of those right beliefs. And the model of transformation looked like this. We've God plus reason equals transformation. So the
Mhm.
more that we're focusing on this truth or getting it right or being right, what we start seeing is the more division, and the more that division becomes necessary. So this is like the anthem of my heart and my life, is always looking at the denominational divide. So here I think you
Mhm.
wrote the denomination split over who was right, and churches were split over all of these small differences in thought and interpretation, because truth was the foundation of everything.
Well, it sounds so right anymore, doesn't it? Well, of course, what else would it be if it wasn't truth?
Exactly.
And yeah, it just seems like you're going to question that,
Mhm.
which actually uh, I am.
And you do.
But yeah, but only because we get talking about what's the foundation, not about what's important.
Yeah.
See, it's not like the truth isn't important, but here's the thing. Suppose that God's a lot smarter than we are.
Mhm.
In fact, I thought to sort of think about it like if I was trying to think of how much smarter God is than me, it would at least be the ratio between uh, a flea and a genius,
Yeah.
you know. So how much of the salvation of the flea depends on understanding the genius? And it
Mm.
just isn't going to float. I'm just like nowhere near smart enough to get this all right. In fact, sometimes I think to myself, if when I get to heaven, I find I got anything right, I'm going to be so delighted, I'm going to do a little dance like, woo, I got that one right,
Kind of like the title to your book. You got
Yeah,
that right.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a delightful little thing. But, it's like, okay, so what is it going to be then that makes a difference? And it
Mhm.
seems from the brain and from what I read in theology, it's actually God's love. It's our attachment to God that's going to make the difference, not exactly how well we've understood him. But going back to the Enlightenment with Descartes, he said, I think, therefore I am. And this was a very brilliant insight from culture's point of view. And so, well, if that's the case, then Christians, of course, anyone who understands God must have the best thoughts. They must have the best truth. So let's rise to the top by saying, well, as long as you're interested in truth, have we got something for you? And so we started packaging Christianity as the best package of truth there was. It's sort of, I think, cultural packaging.
Mhm.
And that's true, of course. We have but getting it exactly right isn't going to happen either.
Right.
And so there starts the problem because you don't package it quite the way I package it. And so I must be closer to God and you must be closer to leading everybody astray.
Exactly.
Huh. Yeah, now we've got a problem.
Problem.
hmm Yeah,
Big.
is that what got you thinking about it to begin with, or?
I think that was so my journey was constantly trying because I was unchurched. So I think I always felt separate and trying to find and fit myself into a belief system, but then that might not be fully able to align with all my experiences of God. So then, and depending who I would align myself in, what denomination, I started observing everyone
Mhm.
held the truth or the right beliefs. But what really got to me, especially came to a huge place in like a faith crisis, was in seminary and all the different denominations represented, but in studying the church and the church history, and just overwhelmed by the amount of disunity and division. And the one
Mhm.
question I kept asking was, what does it look like to come together in love? And nobody could separate truth from that. They would say, but it's truth. And I'd say, but truth doesn't feel like love because truth feels like division. And truth feels like you think this way and they think this way. So it's just causing a lot of division. So I think that truth centered model is the product of that is division. And I just would question, like, wow, God, is that really all you have for us? Is this the plan? Is this the best model that we have?
Mhm. Yeah, and that came out of to a head out of a discussion over the inspiration of Scripture. Had it been word for word, and as it how did it turn out that what God thinks it was being written in human words? And it's that interface that was causing all kinds of trouble when most of our seminary professors were in school. And so everyone was trying to get the answer to that quite right.
Right.
Um, and of course, no one really quite knows. But an interesting little detail about the brain is that knowing and understanding is separate from words.
Mm.
And we all kind of know this, but especially if you know a separate two languages or more, you know that you're often have an idea in search of a word.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
And writers, of course, know about this too. It's like, I know what I'm trying to say, but how am I going to put it in words? And I often think that scripture is God's thinking in search of words.
Oh,
And while he found the words never quite contain the idea that was behind them, like the word love you used, right?
yeah.
Uh, love is a very nice little short word, but does it contain the whole of what's behind it? And everybody knows it doesn't. And so, again, this idea that that we know things, and we can even know things with God that are more than we can put in words. It's this, experience of even peace that passes our understanding, as the Bible refers to it. And so, um, the people who try to work the other way, which are the theologians and since the Enlightenment, they try to start with the words and work their way back
Hmm.
to what God was thinking.
Hmm.
Uh, and the words are always too small to fit the picture. Um, but then when we get fighting over the words, because the words can mean a little different to you and to me, right? Uh, then all of a sudden, if we have to get that exactly right in order to know God, then we have to fight over all these little details. But perhaps, at least in the brain, knowing is separate from talking. So maybe we can know more about God than the words actually allow. And that's kind of how I go about thinking about it. That, yeah, the words should match, but they'll never be quite big enough.
Mm. I love that. And I really want to land in this place a little bit more to unpack those ideas of truth and yada. First, I want to
Mhm.
look at the choice and will. So, there in this enlightenment movement, there comes this second wave, you write. Our will, and so what's discovered is, how did you word it here? We understand that that knowledge, just that reason wasn't enough. That
Mhm.
what you believed to be true made little difference until one made an actual choice.
Mhm.
So this emphasis on free will becomes the most profound means of life change. So I talk to Christians all the time and people that feel stuck or people that are really looking for that transformation and that more. Um, so I like landing in this place today because what happens in this part of our church history, the church model, it looks like God plus choice equals transformation. So now we've changed or added more into this equation of what we're looking for. So now we're looking at discipline and right choices are central to living the Christian life successfully. The combination of being right and making right choices were embraced by the church as these keys to life change. But
Mhm.
does this actually lead to transformation, Jim?
Well, here's the thing that we've got about 300 years of trying to make it work, and it's been discouraging. Um, the logic was uh, going back to total depravity, that there was nothing about human beings that could save themselves. So then we say, well, what are the parts of human beings that can be saved then? Well, the part that seemed key to the voluntarist is if you know the truth, then some part of you has to be able to choose God. And that act of the will becomes salvation. And so, because the will was one of the established parts of human beings from Greek philosophy and all of that. So we had, 1,500 years of thinking about that one. Although the early parts were only thinking about God's will, no one thought about human will mattering at all. But as long as we're on the topic, uh, the only part of human beings that could make a difference was their will. So it must be the thing on which all of theology and salvation and everything else is balanced, which way the will goes would be the one part of the human being. Now, would it be their emotions? Oh no, those are your passions. That'd be terrible. Wouldn't want to know that, and just go down the list of different things. Would it be your body? Well, no, it wouldn't be that. And so, what would make the difference? Well, the will must be savable then somehow or another, although it can't save itself. But that in theology quickly turned into all we can do is make choices, and that's all that's going to matter, and everything else will make a mess out of your life. So if you listen to your emotions, it'll be a mess. If you listen to your body, it'll be a mess. If you listen, just go on the list, listen to your relationships, it'll all be a mess. And since those things are all messes anyway, was hard to argue against. But is there anything deeper in a human being than what you happen to choose? Now, it sounds pretty good until you look at the brain and then you realize that the choices that we make are actually the most fickle part of the brain. They're way up on the cortex and they change the most easily, which of course makes them an excellent target if you want to work on anything. But they're the last to know and the first to change. Wouldn't that be an awfully lousy spot to put what's really going to make a human being change? And then I realized, from my own experience, how many times have I decided I'm not going to do that again? I'm going to do it this way, I'm going to do that. And it just kept slipping apart as soon as I fell asleep or got distracted or something else. Again, it's sort of like the leaves on the tree. Any wind blows them a different direction. What we needed was something that had roots, something that held on to its spot. And the
Mhm.
part of the brain that does that is the attachment. Like, who do I love? That doesn't change very quick. It doesn't uh, get dissuaded because things get bad. Those are the deep attachments. And if so, shouldn't the Bible say that the most important thing would be to love the Lord your God and then to love other people like yourself? If the Bible said stuff like that, then maybe it wasn't your will that was the most important, but it was uh, really who you loved. And St. Clare of Assisi was actually writing about that 1,000 years back. So it's not a new thought in the Christian world, but you can see where once you get down to, well, what's the only thing human beings have going from that, the logic of the Enlightenment, uh, not the logic of the brain. Uh,
Mhm.
so that's how we got to choice. And um, again, from my own experience, I remember just giving up in hopeless despair.
Mhm.
And I must have been about 12 because I decided, I was going to really follow God, and I wasn't ever going to sin again. And I got through almost a week without sin. I doubt that was true, but that's how it seemed to my mind, until my brother got me mad over the bicycle. And I just realized, a bicycle and I lose it all. What's the
Mhm.
point here? I cannot make this decision and make it stick. And no matter how hard I try, I knew I just could not do better than I had that week. I mean, every moment of my waking day had been trying to focus on not sitting today. And, uh, I couldn't beat that effort, in which case it was hopeless to be a Christian.
Mhm.
Um, uh, so that's how I came to my own moment of despair. Uh, and I can still remember where I was sitting to this very day.
Oh, so relatable. And I think that's the bigger picture of just those two topics. You speak about two other big good ideas in
Mm.
the book, but these were the ones that really kind of rose to the surface for me because of my own journey. So this idea of feeling like the weight of my salvation, the weight of how much God would love me, put his favor on me was so dependent on my will and the choices that I would make. And it was almost easier when I wasn't churched because I had felt like I had more freedom to kind of make my own decisions. But as soon as I got into the structure of a religious belief or these ideas, all of a sudden, paralyzing fear of screwing up and making the wrong choice became a part of my everyday. And that just leads to burnout because, like you just shared, I had really great intentions, but I didn't ever know if it was the right call anyway. Did I really hear God say that? Should I really do this? Should I really do this? What if I get it wrong? And, you
Well,
know,
you just hit on another whole snarl in the whole thing, and that is, one is, did I hear God right?
Mhm.
And the other is, do I know the right thing to do? So, in one case, we try to read what God has said and figure out the right thing to do. And of course, statistically, it's impossible to do that. The brain just can't calculate all the options fast enough to even come up with an answer. Um, and on the other hand, listening to God, well, that wasn't put as the foundation of the whole business, was it?
Right.
So, we're supposed to think true thoughts, which is very late in the brain process, as a way to change who we are, which is very early in the brain process. And it just is, it's not designed to work. And again, so if God was giving instructions, shouldn't they be designed the way he designed the brain to work? And that's where I started getting really interested in it. Well, I wonder if we're reading the instructions wrong.
Exactly. And I think it's so the more I tried to find it through understanding everything I could about theology. I spoke at a church last week on my book, and this woman said, "It seems to me in the beginning of your journey, you were trying to understand how to have love and relationship with God through your knowledge of God,
Mhm.
the right theology and belief. But towards the end, it's like you realized that you wanted to do that through a relationship." And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I
Mhm.
was trying to capture in that journey. Because in
Yeah.
both of these, in the enlightenment period that we were talking about today, love is not even on the table of discussion anymore in these conversations.
Now, it came much, much later in the Enlightenment process during the Romantic period. And at that point, love was not about attachment, it was romance and eros and,
Right.
passion and stuff like that. So by the time it entered the process, it was way disconnected from what we mean by love. Because when I talk about love, I'm talking about attachment love, the kind of love that puts parent and children together, that makes your dog follow you when you go outside, that kind of love.
Oh, I like that analogy. I think you were the person that really introduced me to the heart of what this has said looks like in attachment. So let's dive into that a little bit more because going again back to page 13, it's the result of this. We have most of our discipleship, leadership models, and services offered by the church are built on providing more truth and better choices. But I love how you led this into what happens with the lack of meaningful relationships, that our models tend to be very intellectually driven and individual. but we need belonging-based discipleship. And I'd love to just hear in your own words, what is the power? I know you write about power here, but what is that, the essence of belonging, and how that actually is what leads to that transformation or that longevity that we're looking for in this Christian faith?
Mhm. Well, I'll comment before I start on that, that Marcus got into this from his end by wanting to, what he called, fix the broken discipleship factory. Said we keep making disciples over and over and over again. They don't turn out looking or acting at all like Jesus, and we keep doing the same process to everybody and saying, well, it should work if we just try it harder. And he said, well, something is broken. So he started from that end. And so the thing about discipleship, it's interesting when Jesus tells the disciples when at the ascension to go and make disciples, he doesn't say to go make disciples of mine. He says, go make disciples of you and teach them what I taught you.
Yeah.
But actually, it's your attachment with your disciples that what he's trying to intend, that you will go and duplicate who you are in somebody else the way you learned from me. Paul says this later, follow me as I am or have been a follower of Christ. But you never hear this when you hear about discipleship. It's all like, I have to go teach you something. Well, teaching you something is transferring ideas, making you a disciple of mine, making you someone who thinks like I do, and acts like I do, and feels like I do, and does what I do, because of what I learned from Jesus. That's a whole different process, which I never, or at least very rarely, see addressed in the church at all. So how does my attachment to you become fundamental to whether or not we're going to think alike? Well, the brain is designed to do that. It's got a little firewall. If you're not one of my people, I really don't care what you say about me in the same way. It's like, I'm not going to take that in. What do you know about me? But if we have an attachment means we're on shared life support. Someone has said, don't take advice from anybody who isn't going to have to live with the consequences. Shared life support is that thing, like you and I are in this together. And if I gave you bad advice, I'm going to have to suffer from it as much as you do. If I give you good advice, I'll be blessed with it as much as you do. And now at that level, my brain says, okay, I'm listening. I'm open now. You're in this with me. We've got an attachment. We've shared life together, and we're going to share consequences together. We're going to share food and drink and all those other things that keep us alive together. But in this shared life, we are going to be practicing what the master was teaching that you've been working on longer than I have. And then in turn, I'll pass this on to someone else. If this is what it's meant to be, then attachment is, the fact that God loved and cared for us, and he said, nothing's going to separate us. If you come and follow me, whatever your life is, we're going to share together, and I'll always be there, and we'll learn from it. We'll experiment with things. We'll endure things together when we have to, but it's not going to come between us. And that's attachment. And your brain goes, that's what I've been looking for. Now I'm actually quite interested in your ideas, and I hope they're true, but I care about them because I care about you. It really, this is completely off the subject in one way, but I was telling you that I was invited over to some people's houses and they'd been listening to your podcast. And so they were interested in what I had to say because they had an attachment with you. And this is even in a very practical way. This is how it works. You know somebody and they're interested in something, and because you know them, you develop that same kind of interest. This is how we are designed to work. And this makes it not a matter of our faith, but of our relationships that are being shared with each other. And of course, that does help us to have faith.
Exactly.
But it's it's the relationship that builds these things. It's the love. It's the attachment. And I believe that's what the word for attachment in Greek, which is agape, is actually talking about. That, it's not about some kind of um, and the agape in seminary, I was told, is an act of the will. It's not about your feelings; it's about choosing to do something. So agape got turned into the will, but in the brain, it doesn't work that way. I mean, we know this because how many times are you supposed to love somebody and you just like all your enemies?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I'll try to choose that, but you know what? Doesn't work. I still don't like them. And in fact, that was the solution to all marriage and depression and all these other problems when about the time psychology came along and everyone realized, just choosing to love somebody and just choosing to not be alcoholic and just choosing the other things wasn't actually working. So again, we go back to these things that have caused despair. I can't just choose to not be depressed. Well, what do I need? Well, we need a joyful relationship with someone who's with us and shares our trouble, and then we start feeling better. And sometimes we have to fix some depleted chemistry, but these are all part of restoring an attachment, not just getting all your beliefs right.
Oh, I might have to go back and re-listen to that last bit and write that down verbatim. Getting our beliefs right. You know, there was one thing that I really liked visually. I'm a visual thinker. You spoke about a tree with this modeling concept and how, would you share a little bit about that picture? Because we're talking about choices and attachment, and the attachment was the roots.
Yeah, exactly. So when we're talking about the brain, the deepest parts of the brain are the attachment systems in the brain. It gets the information first, and it only passes on whatever it thinks is important to our life, which is like the roots on a tree. And when a tree is well attached, nothing knocks the tree over. Um, and the you get the trunk of the tree, which is sort of like your identity growing up. That's that part of the brain, like, okay, this supports who I am. And then at the end of the branches, you have these leaves that move very easily. They fall off every year. And that's really where the cortex is. It's right all around the edge of the brain. And any different idea will move those leaves and go like, oh, I never thought of that. Oh, I never thought of that. Oh, I never thought of that. And the next day they might fall off. It's like, well, yeah, I remember yesterday I was thinking about something. I don't remember what it was now. And we have this sort of experience of that. And so the will is those parts that move very easily in the brain. And to rely on that as a center for our eternal destiny and our identity uh, just doesn't make any sense. It's the least secure part of the tree. They're important, of course, and without the leaves, trees don't do very well. And if we don't have any beliefs, see, the thing about belief is and truth is it tells us where to put our energy in order to get back on track. So belief is very good for errors.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, that's not right. This can't be the right road. It doesn't look at all like the road we were on the other, whatever, things like that. It doesn't get you where you want to go, but it'll get you out of trouble. And so we need things that can switch their mind around, going like, wait a minute, I was going this way. No, this is not. And of course, the word for that in Greek is metanoia, to rethink, which we usually translate as repent.
Wow.
But it's, repent is so moralized. It wasn't what the original people thought. Just like, would you rethink that a minute? Because I don't think you're on the right track here. And Jesus was always telling people, hey, let's rethink things because the kingdom of God's already here.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really got it, that it's already here, you wouldn't think the same way. And you're going to rethink what? Rethink what? What kingdom of God? It's just you. What's your name again? From Galilee? Um, but this rethinking thing, we need that facility,
Yeah.
but it's not what anchors our soul. Our anchors our soul is that God loves us in a way that doesn't let go. And when we learn about that love and become attached to the same way, they're like, wow, where else would I go? Because who else has the words of life? Who else can feed me and keep my soul alive? And so this place of belonging we all want to be in is
Mm-hmm.
a place where there's life, We don't want to be in the dead place. We want to be in the life places. And so we want to belong there and stay there. Now, I think about it as the first thing that um, happens at conception is that the embryo grows a placenta and attaches itself to the mother. Placenta is actually the baby, and it grows that before developing a self. It's this attachment that nurtures me. And that's my thought of what love or attachment means. I'm attaching myself to the place where there's love so that I can stay alive and grow a self. And that's, I think, the picture that we go back to with, yeah, that's how it's supposed to work. And that is, in fact, how it does work. And if there's no life in that place, we die. And then we want other people to attach to us so that we can share life with them, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't know how this ties in, but it keeps coming up. So bear with me if this is a total detour. But it's like, I know for me, the journey of understanding how to love myself well was really affected by this inability to really understand how to belong. And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
kind of visually, like, just seeing that, even with that example of we're trying to love out of this place when we're really not attaching ourselves. It was very hard to attach myself to truth and all these things because everything created this measuring system that I just never really felt like I measured up in all these situations. And I
Mm-hmm.
found it really challenging to understand love and attachment there.
Yeah, because truth, as I pointed out, is most useful in finding when you're looking for error. You know, if you want to say, is this organically grown fruit? Yes, we want to know because we don't want to get the stuff with pesticides on it, right? But now that we know it doesn't have pesticides on it, is there any nutrition in it till we eat it? Now, truth doesn't help us at that point. It's just taking it in. It's this shared life experience. Uh, I mean, even the original fall of humankind, as we're told about in Genesis, was when Adam and Eve let the wrong being feed them.
Mm,
You accept life from the wrong source, and it isn't life, it's actually a deception, and this stuff will kill you, which it did. They'd been warned, and that's a whole other story. But the point is, the attachment to who feeds us is central to the entire story of the Bible, because the one who feeds us is the one who gives us life. That's who we attach to, and it's a shared life. We want it to be true life,
hmm
not pesticides,
yeah.
but it is not the truth that keeps us alive. It's the
hmm
life that's in it uh, that we're really seeking. And so I think that's what you're talking about, that
Yeah.
while you didn't want to eat pesticides, just knowing if something had it or not wasn't enough to nurture you. You had to have a place where you went, oh, here's the life I've been looking for. These people are sharing it and they're helping me to live it better.
Yeah.
And that's what your soul needs.
Absolutely. That feels like an amen kind of moment for me, Jim. Well, here's
I
kind of
think it is.
it really is. It's really everything. I would love to sit in this place of chapter 3 where you really do tackle this idea of truth. I love how you write this, that truth is a person. So like I was kind of sharing a little bit with you before we jumped
Mm-hmm.
in asking that question of what is the true meaning of truth? Like, what does it actually mean? Like you said, a difference between the knowledge of a thing versus the words I'm trying to put around it. I was so fascinated by the discovery of looking at the Greek word and the Hebrew word by seeing how far away the meanings were to where we've landed in truth today. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, when I was looking at and kind of taking apart the word or looking at the word families or the root words, understanding aletheia as more of this word of unconcealed or unforgetting, I think was one of the other definitions. There was an element of trust and faithfulness. Even looking at the Hebrew word was maybe emet, I think, and amen. It was like more of this enduring faithfulness. And even the English word for truth came from, I think the etymology was from troth, like in betrothal, and it was more of a promise. But
Mm-hmm.
everything, as I was kind of paring back this word study, came to truth as being something so far more relational. And that kind of all came together through this understanding of yada and this experiential knowledge where we get our truth from or how that looks. And it just fit in so much into turning, kind of flipping the script on what I was doing, realizing that I was kind of putting the horse before the cart. It was, I needed to have that secure attachment to get the truth I was after, like we've just talked about.
Mhm.
But in chapter 3, you talk about this as that left brain knowing and the right brain knowing. We touched on that a little bit. But I like how you said both sides are important to emotion and reason because they look at the world in two very different ways. But I was curious, Jim, what is this word yada to you, and why is this the key to transformation and identity?
Well, the brain is designed to do a very weird thing, and that is to organize itself into a person by finding a greater mind and going, that mind has got it. So there's something inside of us that lets it register that person really got something. They're thinking, what they're thinking makes sense to them. It doesn't make sense to me yet, but I know they've got it. That's yada, that's knowing. And so out of that fog materializes the thing that stands. So we go back to that flea and the genius that I was talking about. When the flea realizes that the genius understands something and wants to learn to think the way the genius does, and that they kind of get it, like, oh, that's it. That's a yada moment. It's like, now I don't know how to explain it to you exactly. You ever have that you got something, but how you're going to explain it to someone else, you just have no idea yet, but you know you've got it. And the place that almost everybody experiences is math class. You know the teacher is talking about something that must make sense, and they can write it out there, and you look at that and like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I know you've got it. And if we're curious enough and not afraid enough, we'll actually, after a little while, it's like, oh, I got it. And now I know what you're thinking. I still can't explain it to anybody, but this is this process. Your brain, the tacit knowledge or intuitive knowledge, or there's all kinds of ways we try to talk about, describe it, but that's on the right side of your brain. And so if we're thinking with a greater mind, which is God, and all of a sudden something goes like, oh, now I've got it. And again, how many times have you read something out of the Bible and it's like, I don't know what they're talking about. And then all of a sudden, bloop,
Mm-hmm.
oh, wow, I never thought that before. And then about 7 years later, you think something else from the same passage, like, oh, I never thought that before either. And there's this continual yada process that goes on as you get more and more of it. The flea is catching on more and more of what the genius is thinking, right? Uh, that knowing, which we try to put in words, is what's becomes solid out of the fog. It's like I was staring into this, but now something became solid. We call that truth because it stays. I live in the Rocky Mountains. They used to be twice as tall as they are now, and they washed away. But what is still here, that's that remnant that we go like, oh, that's what was left when we took away all that other stuff. This stuff stayed, and I can hold on to it. And I think the truth process is very much that way. I mean, I didn't get anywhere with my Christianity, having grown up as a Christian, um, and learning to understand how God thought and all those sorts of things until I got rid of the God I understood.
Mm-hmm.
The God I understood is always smaller than my mind because he makes total sense to me. The God who's smarter than I am, I can sort of yada sometimes what he's saying, but a lot of times I'm like, oh, I can't quite get around that corner yet, but I know you've got it. And so this is again the whole right hemisphere is set to do that sort of thing, to say, I get how you're thinking here. Now I don't know how to explain it exactly. I can't get it down to the details, but I know how this fits together. And that's what the word shalom means. And so this idea that to really sense what's true, even if we can't quite explain it, is the process we go through forming truth internally. Now, developmentally, we start with knowing a lot of things before we can think abstract reason. which doesn't develop till 12, 13, or
Mm.
sometimes 20. Um, but uh, the the problem with education is we put abstract reason as the basis for everything, as opposed to the last test we got to run it through. Well, will it make it through abstract reason? So if I know that you're my mother and we live like you're my mother, eventually abstract reason should confirm to me that you're my mother, right?
Okay.
It should all fit together, but you don't start with abstract reasoning. Now, child, let me explain to you for the following reasons. Then we'll look at the genetic code first, and then I'll break it down to you. And then, if so, I think you should nurse. No. So, and so again, this shall we call it a more organic way of
Yeah.
learning to know, but ultimately it should the abstract truths should harmonize with that. They should fit. If not, you go like, wait a minute, something along the way got lost. The leaves are all shaking now. They're going to rethink this one, rethink this one.
Oh,
One other funny little thing that probably trivial, but there's a little spot right here on the right side of your head, just above your ear. And if it gets damaged, you'll never change your opinions again for the rest of your life.
mm,
So it tells you how fickle a little changing of your opinion part of your brain is. There's a little spot you can lose it to a stroke and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, now I'm stuck with all the same thoughts um, for the rest of my life. They're never going to change. So we need the ability to change our thoughts.
mhm.
Um, but we shouldn't really put all our marbles in that basket, you know. And so
Right.
that's the fun thing about this. Love does, as attachment love, does uh, resist all, you know, all opposition that comes its way. You know, nothing makes it disappear. So where are the prophecies? They'll cease. Is there, you know, the truth are always faith and hope. They'll run out, but this attachment isn't going to. And so I think it is the most solid thing we've got, and not a bad place to build your faith
Mm,
um, as you go along. So
mm.
these things just make me smile, although I know I didn't explain them very well. You know, something in my flea brain goes like, well, you put that in some words there, and some people are going to get that wrong. But you know, these are the times when the things that are bigger than we are try to find their way out our mouths
Yeah.
and share them with each other. So it's kind of fun doing this with you, but I'm sure it leaves as many questions as it answers.
Well, a few thoughts on that because I think that's just what I love about how God works and moves because of the way that these are thoughts and threads and ideas that I've been sitting in. And then I get to come alongside you and look how you've explained and explored this. And I've already been on my own trajectory, so I get to take some of those and just shoulder up, make firm some of those beliefs and thoughts for myself. And that's what I love doing in community and just having conversations like this today. These are some big concepts and certainly ones that I never explored or experienced until I was in seminary. So part of my heart was always, especially after studying the history of the church, just that I just think this is something that we all should at least be aware of, gain some kind of awareness of how the church has moved throughout the last 2,000 years and what it looks like from where it started to where it is today. And I think there's just, especially the division in our world, just at large. I think this is a thought about our faith in Christianity, but what does it look like to come together in love first? So often we're coming together and trying to come together in our beliefs and
Well, this has never worked very well. And most of what passes for ecumenical is trying to figure out what are the least possible beliefs that we could disagree about.
yeah.
So what's on the list of, you know, what are the essentials are. But um, many of the theologians of the last 500 years have despaired of any chance of actually having the character of Christ in our lives. Like, okay, now we'll just have to have church rituals. Now we'll just have to have church membership. Now we'll just have to have whatever it is. It'll be sort of the minimum. and we'll agree on that. But if this is actually about becoming these people that love like Jesus loves, then shouldn't it start from a relational start? And and the that actually is something everyone agrees with. Like, we might think it's impossible, but
Mhm.
loving like Jesus loves actually is pretty essential to everything that you want to call Christian. If it's not got that ingredient in it, we look at it and go like, I don't know where you came up with this stuff, but it's hateful and miserable, and I don't see any of Jesus' character. I don't see any of his thought. I don't see any of his relationships. I don't see any of his love. I don't really see his truth in there either. Maybe fragments of it, but so starting with the most uh, non-influential part of the brain to form unity isn't going to work. When we start with, and this is a fun thing with one of my friends, he went to work to teach something in a church which most churches wouldn't even quite accept as a church. And so he got a lot of criticism for it. And I asked him, well, why'd you do that? He said, well, I teach people to listen to Jesus. And is there anybody on earth you wouldn't want to teach that to? Yeah, you had me there. Like, no, I think any place you can go that they'll let you do that, there's a good reason to go. And I think that's, again, the unity. If we want to think with God, is there anybody we don't want to teach that to?
Right.
And I think the answer is no. I think the people I dislike the most, I'd most want to teach that to if they would learn it, right? And there, I think we got a place to start.
Mm.
Uh, and from that, we'll also be able to detect what Jesus meant by what he said.
No kidding. That's the
So,
tricky part.
yeah. The better you get to know somebody, the more you understand what they meant by what they said.
Yes.
Yeah, this is also true.
By now, we may have really put our listeners' brains in the blender of what truth is. So
Uh,
let me read this last
truth,
page here.
truth is thinking like Jesus.
Oh, there we go.
That's why it's a relationship. Truth is thinking like Jesus does about things, because he's a lot smarter, he knows a lot more, and on and on and on.
You know that the verse, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I don't think I really could understand that until I really put Jesus in that place. That truth is a person.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So on
Yeah.
page 68, you write, when Hesed replaces truth as the foundation of discipleship, the whole model self-corrects. And I think that's what we've just talked about. You said placing love at the core of the transformation process allows truth, choice, and power to play their proper roles and not bear a weight they were never intended to carry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I don't think we've defined Hesed for your listeners this time, and it's a book length definition when people try to explain what it is. It's another one of those ideas that we can understand, but we can't really find the words for it.
Yep.
But that's often translated loyalty, but it actually means a relationship with you that always looks for what's good for you, always has your best in mind, and nothing makes you uh, lose that interest. It's a solid, in this relationship, what's good for you will always be important. And that's a said. So when we do that, we start to say, well, what is good for people? This is to have the life that's in Jesus. What's good for people? To think the way he does. What's good for people? To relate to other people the way he does. What is good for people? To find out who he created them to be. These are the things that are all good for people. And when you do that, you find people changing. That's what discipleship is. They're becoming more like you in all the ways that you're more like Jesus. And I think that's what he asked us to do.
Wow, Jim, that is a pretty incredible way to come full circle in this conversation today. So
Sort of inspiring, isn't it?
it really is. And I can't thank you enough for just holding space for this and coming back again to have this discussion with me. It's just blessed me more than I can possibly convey. I don't have the words for it, just gonna hold the experience here. But is there anything
I
you'd like
appreciate that.
to share?
But I really just like to say that I like the way that you have gone looking for the things that are full of life. And talking with you, it has this kind of sense of we're resonating on the things that have life in them. And we're supposed to think on those things that are about life and godliness, the kind of life that God wanted us to have. I experienced that talking with you, and so it's fun to be in your little podcast interview here and watch you try to keep all of this stuff on track while life is flowing everywhere like gravy getting out of the potatoes.
No, we stayed right on track. I didn't really have a track. I just had, inspirations today that I thought would be really fun to sit with, and we hit them all. And you
Very
hit
good.
them
I
out of the
enjoyed
park.
it.
It was
All right.
such a blast. Well, for anyone else listening, I'm sure last time we kicked off or ended, you were sharing about some future writings. Is there anything you want to share with people? Anything coming up in your life for people to look forward to?
Well, that I don't want to fully make a commitment, but I'm being asked to maybe write something on thinking with God that sort of, kind of puts this together. And God thinks in some ways that are faster than the human mind, and some ways that are as slow as generations at a time. And so trying to, all these different speeds at which God thinks, and how do we think with him on those speeds? It'd be a fun subject to write about. I'm not promising I will, but
No promises.
that's kind of what I'm thinking about these days. So we'll see where that goes.
Oh, well, keep me posted because I would definitely love to continue conversations on that.
All right, I'd love to do that. Thanks for having me as a guest.
Oh, so much fun, Jim. All right, well, I will post some more of Jim's websites, links, places to connect in, books, all things Jim Wilder, so you guys can continue to check it out. And absolutely the solution of choice, something that you can dig into a little deeper if you liked this conversation today. Thanks, friends, and we will be back again soon.